Okay, going to go through, have a quick video explanation around PVLANs, the primary VLAN, the isolated VLAN, and how we need to have devices to communicate to each other using microsegmentation. So the first thing we can do is we'll have a quick look at our vSphere client. I've got two VDSs here, so lab and management. All my work will be done on the lab VDS. It's important to understand that we need to have a VMware distributed switch, or a VDS, as these are the only types of switches that support a PVLAN based port group. So if your customer, your network or your environment or your lab doesn't have Enterprise Plus licensing, you won't be able to configure a VDS to enable the mandatory PVLAN to create a micro-segmentation isolated port group. So there's two ways we can create a PVLAN. We can do this directly within the configuration options inside AFC. We can also go to the visualization and click on the vSwitch. Now you see the vSwitch here called Lab, which is the same as what I have in my vSphere client. This is connected to two uplinks, so uplinks 3 and 5, which then follow their way down to the CX10K switches. So you'll see that I've got the VLANs configured on the trunk. The interface is configured with specific VLAN entries on it, and we use LRDP for neighbor discovery as well. So you'll see that my CX10K switch on port 33 and 34 knows that it is connected to VM NIC 5 and 3, which is what we're representing here, 5 and 3 here. So we also need to have LLDP functioning in our environment to allow the topology to be visualized and to allow the system to understand what is at the other end of the link, so we can configure the appropriate VLANs. So there's two prerequisites really. So far, a VMware distributed switch to allow PVLAN creation, and LRDP to enable neighbor discovery, and to allow the system to correctly configure the right upstream trunk ports. So if I want to create a new primary VLAN, I can do this in two places. I can do it from AFC, I can also do it from vSphere, and I'll do one of both as well. So let's have a look at the private VLANs we have configured right now. Private VLANs consist of two elements: the primary VLAN, or also known as the promiscuous VLAN, and the isolated VLAN. So in a traditional VLAN environment, we can have a VLAN. So if we have a VLAN, let's say its VLAN ID is 1001, and I have devices connected to this VLAN, and I have that, so this is a port group, so a VMware port group with an ID of 1001. If that is connected to an upstream switch, a CX10K switch, any switch that is on the same VLAN, so 1001, with a gateway of say .1, and this machine here has got 10, 11, 12, and I want to communicate to each other, then this device, because it is a VLAN is a broadcast domain, I can communicate with each other directly on that VLAN. So there is no security enforcement taking place here. The only time we ever come near the upstream switch or router is when I need to route to a different subnet, or potentially across the fabric to a different member of the VDS. So this is what we typically have in our environments, but there is no micro-segmentation security enforcement taking place. So we really need to have a look at how we configure this with, I guess, with a PVLAN. Right, so let's redo this again, and we'll make a PVLAN, and we'll use VLAN, the same VLAN ID, 1001, and an isolated VLAN of 1002. So we've got our upstream CX10K switch, which is configured here, and again that's got a gateway of, let's say, 192.168.1 101.1. So that's our gateway. And we're going to connect this into a PVLAN instance. So I'm going to have this connected into (1001) as a primary VLAN. And then I'm going to configure my isolated VLAN. Up here. So we've got the same basic setup we had before, but now we're going to have an isolated VLAN. With an ID of 1002. Right. So isolated VLAN, primary VLAN. And again, we've got our workloads here that are attached. And we'll go through and we'll attach these and we'll see how they work. I've only got 2, I think, in my setup, but let's have a look. And we'll configure these for .10, 11.12. And being an isolated VLAN, there is no communication. So MAC address, the MAC address on 10 is not able to communicate to any other MAC addresses on this isolated VLAN. They have to traverse down through the primary VLAN. So communication is allowed to flow through here, but remember that this MAC address is not allowed to communicate with this MAC address or this MAC address over here. So we need to have traffic coming down through the upstream gateway device, in this case the CX10,000, and have it change the MAC address. So when it comes back into the isolated VLAN, it looks like it's actually coming from a different MAC address, or a different source MAC address. And we do that through local proxy ARP on the CX10K down here. And we'll go through and configure that as well. So let's configure our new construct. So the good thing about this is we can keep the existing VLAN configuration for layer 2 and layer 3 for the IP address the same on the CX10K, but we now have a separate attachment point inside the VMware switch. So I'll do this through AFC. We'll click on here. Now I don't have my layer 3 configuration on the CX10K, so we'll also do that. So we're going to call this, let's call it database. Right. And we're going to have our primary VLAN was 1001, and our isolated VLAN we're going to choose 1002. So these VLANs need to be unique on that vSwitch. If there is an existing base VLAN of 1001 or 1002 used elsewhere, this will fail. So it doesn't allow you to reuse VLANs. I can keep adding additional ones here if I want to. I'm just going to add one. Successfully added. So we should see that this will refresh. I can force a refresh here as well. So we have database 1001, 1002. Now if I click on 1001, you'll see it says promiscuous. And this one says isolated. So looking at our diagram, our isolated attachment point here, any VMs attached to the isolated instance cannot communicate to each other. So we'll do that first and see if that functions before we actually go through and configure the rest of this. Now, as an aside, I'll just quickly check on here as well. Don't know if we actually saw that here. We should have our primary. Okay, so it has configured this on here. I'll make another one just to quickly show you what I did as well. So you may not have been able to see that. So database 1001, database 1002. Let's create another one here as well quickly. Update PVLAN, so we'll call this web 1003, 1004. And like I said before, we could keep adding these as well, so we can go if we want to as well. And this prefix name here will be used to prepend them. Right, so it's me adding these, and you'll see if I jump back into vSphere, that these have all been added here as well. So the one I did before, the original one, database 1001, 1002. 1001 is a promiscuous, so you'll see the term primary and promiscuous VLAN being used here. And 1002 is my isolated VLAN, so we have isolated listed here as well. Okay, so let's attach a couple of VMs to our isolated instance. All right, so I've got two VMs over here, B1 and B2. So I'm going to let's attach them to the isolated, which was 1002. And change. Right, they're now attached. Let's jump on the web console for these. Okay. Now I'll just put some new IP addresses. Our subnet we chose before was 192.168.101. I think it's the root is the username. Okay, so there's an address on there already. So let's change this. IP address delete. Okay, IP address. Okay, we're gonna do an IP address add 101/.11. Okay, so that's up. I'll do the same for the other one as well. Okay. So these are attached to the isolated port group, so we should not be able to ping the other VM. So even though these are attached to the same port group, they cannot communicate to each other because it is isolated. Right, so we can have a look at the ARP table as well. So it has failed to get a valid ARP response for the 11 machine. So what we've done so far is we've attached, what was it called? B1. Actually, this is B1 and B2. So 11 and 12. So an ARP request will go out to the network. It will not be, there'll be no response. That is dropped because that MAC address cannot talk. So B1 cannot communicate to B2. So we can't even get an ARP response from it. Isolated VLAN. So how do we fix that? We have to integrate into the upstream CX10K, which is attached to the promiscuous or primary VLAN. Right, so let's do that. So the first thing we're going to do is ensure that we have our upstream switch configured correctly. So we have the VLAN on our switch here, so it's configured on here. Let's have a look and see if our trunk is configured correctly as well. So AFC should have configured both of these to be on the correct VLAN as well. And it doesn't look like it has, so let's go and have a look at the switch. It has actually configured it, I think, 33, it's not showing in the GUI, so I'm going to refresh this. Right. Okay, it is there. Just had to refresh the output. Right, so we now have that configured. So let's go through and configure our layer 3 gateway. We can do this from the CLI, we can also do it from here as well, so I'm going to put it into the default. Okay, SVI on VLAN 1001. I'm going to assign it to my single switch. 110 is the subnet. I'm going to allocate some additional addresses if I was to run VSX or EVPN, which I'm not. 8, and we're going to put the active gateway address on here as 1. Right. Okay, so we're going to choose that, and we're going to have an active gateway MAC address as well. Right, I'm not going to enable local proxy ARP just yet. What is wrong with this? Don't need to have that. So there is no 1001. No interface there yet. Let's okay, there it is. Okay, so we've got our IP address here, so it's chosen the first available address from that range of addresses, and it's put an active gateway of .1 and a MAC address, which would be shared between a VSX pair or EVPN Anycast gateways. Okay, so we've got that configured, so let's see if we can ping the gateway. Let's choose the other one because that is... Okay, and we can ping that because the gateway is not attached to an isolated VLAN, it's attached to the primary or promiscuous VLAN. So that is expected to function like that. I still can't ping 11. Alright, so my ARP table has got entries for both 1 and 2, so the gateway address is .1 and the MAC address I configured in here was at 0002 MAC address, right? And I don't have response for 11. Okay, so let's go and enable local proxy ARP and find our interface on here. So it was this one here, 1001. We're going to edit that. I'm going to tick this local proxy ARP. Let's come back and look at our config. So we now have IP local proxy ARP. So let's have a look at the MAC address table here as well. Okay, so 1001, we've got a couple of MAC addresses. Now these will be VMware machines here. Right, so can we configure, or can we ping 11? Okay, we can. So you see the initial ARP response took 39 microseconds here, milliseconds. Right, and let's look at our ARP table. IP neighbor, right. Okay, and this MAC address here is the same as our gateway address. So local proxy ARP will steer traffic when V1 does an ARP request for B2. This can't respond because it's isolated, but local proxy ARP down here, it can wave and say, yep, I'm here, send your traffic to me, and it will then forward traffic on behalf. So the traffic flow is now going down here. Local proxy ARP is drawing that traffic down to that device, and we know how to get to the remote MAC address. So I'm trying to get to 0054C56, this one here. It knows to get to that via 33. Right, so the traffic flow is going back up here, and it's changing the MAC address for the source and sending it back here. And likewise, the return traffic will come back down through here. So we now are forcing traffic to come up through this central MAC address gateway here using local proxy ARP, and we're not sending traffic through this isolated VLAN. So all traffic now has to be steered through here. So this is not a construct of the Pensando DPU. This is actually something that is built into the switching silicon inside the CX10K. We haven't even configured redirection at this point. So this can be used for other capabilities, even just for simple ACLs as well. And it's what the competition uses when they enforce a TCAM-based ACL stateless security sort of enforcement policy. Right, so we've got that configured. Traffic is now going through here. It's important that we validate this by ensuring that the MAC addresses for all devices outside the isolated VLAN are the same MAC address as the upstream gateway device, the CX10K. It's important that we ensure that the here VLAN 1, that it knows how to reach the real MAC addresses and where they are. So in this case, it's using two different interfaces, which is fine. They're both connected to the same switch. And that's pretty much it. That's how local proxy ARP works. If we don't have local proxy ARP, when we're using a PVLAN based construct, then traffic will not be able to be redirected and forwarded back to to and from the destination. So one last thing I'll show you, which I said I would, is we can actually create the PVLAN based port groups directly inside vSphere as well. So we don't have to change the workflow of a customer. So we can come into our VDS here. We have to go to settings and then edit private VLAN. This is a two-step process. I'm going to assign the VLANs. Now, before I said we can't reuse any VLANs. So if there's anything, you obviously can't use VLAN 300, 555, but likewise, you can't also use any of the existing isolated or community VLANs that are sitting here as well. So we can add another one. Hold on, I think I just may have. Right, so I'm going to add, let's say, 1010 here. And then over here, I'm going to add an isolated. Now, it will automatically choose the next available VLAN above the promiscuous one. Right, if it's available. If not, it will skip to the next one. Right, so this doesn't create the port group, this just allocates the VLANs. And now I can make a new distributed port group. I'm going to make web isolated. Now, this lets me then choose if I want to create an isolated or promiscuous. It doesn't make two for me like AFC does. So create a single one. And then we have web isolated here. See, it's isolated. So the upstream switch will still need to be configured on VLAN 1010, and the workloads will be on this isolated VLAN 1011. Now this will appear inside AFC as well, because AFC is reading this data from here it is here, web isolated. So it has learned that from the system, and importantly, it should also go down and map this to the correct show VLAN 10. Let's do private VLAN. Okay, so it's automatically configured that on my switch. And importantly, it should also have configured the trunk port for me. And we're good to go. So layer 2 is operational. We simply need to go away and configure our layer 3 constructs and importantly configure our local proxy ARP. So at this stage, as I said before, we haven't done any Pensando inspection. We have no redirection, so there's no redirect taking place. So this is all just happening directly inside the switching silicon. If we want to redirect this up to our silicon, we jump back to routing, to VRF, where we configured our IP address. And instead of going to IP interfaces, we go to networks. And we leave a ping running over here. Okay, let's actually do an ARP request on that one. Okay, there's our, okay, cool, that's pinging that one. What was this one doing? I was pinging 120, it's not going to work. Okay, so we have a ping going in place. Let's just do some redirection. Now that was on VLAN 1001. Actions, add. As one. We only have to redirect the primary VLAN. Let's look at our redirection policy. It knows that VLAN 1002 is part of this private VLAN construct. Okay, and now we're redirecting through the DPU. Now there is a default policy I've assigned to the a policy already assigned to the VRF. So we're now actually impacting traffic because the default VRF policy is being applied. I can fix that by disabling the redirect if I want to, or removing it. Right, things are now working. Okay, so hopefully that explains the differences between a standard VLAN, a PVLAN with primary or promiscuous VLAN at the base, and attached to that we have the isolated VLAN. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.